Then he thought of his little daughter, and the ghastliness of his supposition overpowered him. He had a deep emotion, a sudden emotion that made him feel quite faint at the idea of that young life spoiled before it had fairly begun. His dear child's life. Lying back in his chair, he covered his face with both his hands. Ali glanced down at him and said, unconcernedly, "Master, finish." Almayer was lost in the immensity of his commiseration for himself, for his daughter, who was, perhaps, not going to be the richest woman in the world, notwithstanding Lingard's promises. He did not understand the other's question, and muttered through his fingers in a doleful tone, "What did you say?" "What? Finish what?" "Clear up, Meza," explained Ali. "Clear up," burst out Almayer, with incomprehensible exasperation. "Devil take you and the table! Stupid! Chatterer! Chalaka! Get out!" He leaned forward, glaring at his headman, then sank back in his seat with his arms hanging straight down on each side of the chair. And he sat motionless in a meditation so concentrated and so absorbing, with all his power of thought so deep within himself, that all expression disappeared from his face in an aspect of staring vacancy. Ali was clearing the table. He dropped negligently the tumbler into the greasy dish, flung there the spoon and fork, then slipped in the plate with a push amongst the remnants of food. He took up the dish, tucked up the bottle under his armpit, and went off. "My hammock!" shouted Almayer after him. "Ada!" "I come soon," answered Ali from the doorway in an offended tone, looking back over his shoulder. How could he clear the table and hang the hammock at the same time? Yahweh! Those white men were all alike. Wanted everything done at once. Like children. The indistinct murmur of his criticism went away, faded and died out together with the soft footfall of his bare feet in the dark passage. For some time Almayer did not move. His thoughts were busy at work shaping a momentous resolution, and in the perfect silence of the house he believed that he could hear the noise of the operation as if the work had been done with a hammer. He certainly felt a thumping of strokes, faint, profound, and startling, somewhere low down in his breast, and he was aware of a sound of dull knocking, abrupt and rapid, in his ears. Now and then he held his breath, unconsciously, too long, and had to relieve himself by a deep expiration that whistled dully through his pursed lips. The lamp standing on the far side of the table threw a section of a lighted circle on the floor, where his outstretched legs stuck out from under the table with feet rigid and turned up like the feet of a corpse, and his set face with fixed eyes would have been also like the face of the dead, but for its vacant yet conscious aspect, the hard, the stupid, the stony aspect of one not dead, but only buried under the dust, ashes, and corruption of personal thoughts, of base fears, of selfish desires. "I will do it." Not till he heard his own voice did he know that he had spoken. It startled him. He stood up. The knuckles of his hand, somewhat behind him, were resting on the edge of the table as he remained still with one foot advanced, his lips a little open, and thought, it would not do to fool about with Lingard. But I must risk it. It's the only way I can see. I must tell her. She has some little sense. I wish they were 1,000 miles off already. 100,000 miles. I do. And if it fails? And she blabs out then to Lingard. She seemed a fool. No, probably they will get away. And if they did, would Lingard believe me? Yes. I never lied to him. He would believe. I don't know. Perhaps he won't. I must do it. Must, he argued aloud to himself. For a long time he stood still, looking before him with an intense gaze, a gaze rapt and immobile, that seemed to watch the minute quivering of a delicate balance, coming to a rest. To the left of him, in the whitewashed wall of the house that formed the back of the veranda, there was a closed door. Black letters were painted on it proclaiming the fact that behind that door there was the office of Lingard and Company. The interior had been furnished by Lingard when he had built the house for his adopted daughter and her husband, and it had been furnished with reckless prodigality. There was an office desk, a revolving chair, bookshelves, a safe, all to humor the weakness of Almeida, who thought all those paraphernalia necessary to successful trading. Lingard had laughed, but had taken immense trouble to get the things. It pleased him to make his protégé, his adopted son-in-law, happy. It had been the sensation of Samba some 5 years ago. While the things were being landed, the whole settlement literally lived on the river bank in front of the Raja Lord's house, to look, to wonder, to admire. What a big mezza, with many boxes fitted all over it and under it. What did the white man do with such a table? And look, look, oh brothers! There is a green square box, with a gold plate on it, a box so heavy that those 20 men cannot drag it up the bank. Let us go, brothers, and help pull at the ropes, and perchance we may see what's inside. Treasure, no doubt. Gold is heavy and hard to hold, O brothers. Let us go and earn a recompense from the fierce Raja of the sea who shouts over there, with a red face. See! There is a man carrying a pile of books from the boat. What a number of books! What were they for? And an old invalided Jurumudi, who had travelled over many seas and had heard holy men speak in far-off countries, explained to a small knot of unsophisticated citizens of Samba that those books were books of magic that guides the white men's ships over the seas, that gives them their wicked wisdom and their strength, of magic that makes them great, powerful, and irresistible while they live, and, praise be to Allah, the victims of Satan, the slaves of Jahannam when they die. And when he saw the room furnished, Almeida had felt proud. In his exultation of an empty-headed quill driver, he thought himself, by the virtue of that furniture, at the head of a serious business. He had sold himself to Lingard for these things, married the Malay girl of his adoption for the reward of these things and of the great wealth that must necessarily follow upon conscientious bookkeeping. He found out very soon that trade in Samba meant something entirely different. He could not guide Patalalo, control the irrepressible old Sahaman, or restrain the youthful vagaries of the fierce Bahassoen with pen, ink, and paper. He found no successful magic in the blank pages of his ledgers, and gradually he lost his old point of view in the saner appreciation of his situation. The room known as the office became neglected then like a temple of an exploded superstition. At first, when his wife reverted to her original savagery, Almaia, now and again, had sought refuge from her there, but after their child began to speak, to know him, he became braver, for he found courage and consolation in his unreasoning and fierce affection for his daughter, in the impenetrable mantle of selfishness he wrapped round both their lives, round himself, and that young life that was also his. When Lingard ordered him to receive Joanna into his house, he had a truckle bed put into the office, the only room he could spare. The big office desk was pushed on one side, and Joanna came with her little shabby trunk and with her child and took possession in her dreamy, slack, half-asleep way, took possession of the dust, dirt, and squalor, where she appeared naturally at home, where she dragged a melancholy and dull existence, an existence made up of sad remorse and frightened hope, amongst the hopeless disorder, the senseless and vain decay of all these emblems of civilized commerce. Bits of white stuff, rags yellow, pink, blue, rags limp, brilliant and soiled, trailed on the floor, lay on the desk amongst the somber covers of books soiled, grimy, but stiff-backed, in virtue, perhaps, of their European origin. The biggest set of bookshelves was partly hidden by a petticoat, the waistband of which was caught upon the back of a slender book pulled a little out of the row so as to make an improvised clothes-peg. The folding canvas bedstead stood nearly in the middle of the room, stood anyhow, parallel to no wall, as if it had been, in the process of transportation to some remote place, dropped casually there by tired bearers. And on the tumbled blankets that lay in a disordered heap on its edge, Joanna sat almost all day with her stockingless feet upon one of the bed pillows that were somehow always kicking about the floor. She sat there, vaguely tormented at times by the thought of her absent husband, but most of the time thinking tearfully of nothing at all, looking with swimming eyes at her little son, at the big-headed, pasty-faced, and sickly Louis Willems, who rolled a glass inkstand, solid with dried ink, about the floor, and tottered after it with the portentous gravity of demeanor and absolute absorption by the business in hand that characterize the pursuits of early childhood. Through the half-open shutter a ray of sunlight, a ray merciless and crude, came into the room, beat in the early morning upon the safe in the far-off corner, then, traveling against the sun, cut at midday the big desk in two with its solid and clean-edged brilliance, with its hot brilliance in which a swarm of flies hovered in dancing flight over some dirty plate forgotten there amongst yellow papers for many a day. And towards the evening the cynical ray seemed to cling to the ragged petticoat, lingered on it with wicked enjoyment of that misery it had exposed all day, lingered on the corner of the dusty bookshelf, in a red glow intense and mocking, till it was suddenly snatched by the setting sun out of the way of the coming night. And the night entered the room. The night abrupt, impenetrable and all-filling with its flood of darkness, the night cool and merciful, the blind night that saw nothing, but could hear the fretful whimpering of the child, the creak of the bedstead, Joanna's deep sighs as she turned over, sleepless, in the confused conviction of her wickedness, thinking of that man masterful, fair-headed, and strong, a man hard perhaps, but her husband, her clever and handsome husband to whom she had acted so cruelly on the advice of bad people. If her own people, and of her poor, dear, deceived mother. To Almeria, Joanna's presence was a constant worry, a worry unobtrusive yet intolerable, a constant, but mostly mute, warning of possible danger. In view of the absurd softness of Lingard's heart, everyone in whom Lingard manifested the slightest interest was to Almeria a natural enemy. He was quite alive to that feeling, and in the intimacy of the secret intercourse with his inner self had often congratulated himself upon his own wide-awake comprehension of his position. In that way, and impelled by that motive, Almeria had hated many and various persons at various times. But he never had hated and feared anybody so much as he did hate and fear Willems. Even after Willem's treachery, which seemed to remove him beyond the pale of all human sympathy, Almeria mistrusted the situation and groaned in spirit every time he caught sight of Joanna. He saw her very seldom in the daytime. But in the short and opal-tinted twilights, or in the azure dusk of starry evenings, he often saw, before he slept, the slender and tall figure trailing to and fro the ragged tail of its white gown over the dried mud of the riverside in front of the house. Once or twice when he sat late on the veranda, with his feet upon the deal table on a level with the lamp, reading the 7-months-old copy of the North China Herald, brought by Lingard, he heard the stairs creak, and, looking round the paper, he saw her frail and meagre form rise step by step and toil across the veranda, carrying with difficulty the big, fat child, whose head, lying on the mother's bony shoulder, seemed of the same size as Joanna's own. Several times she had assailed him with tearful clamor or mad entreaties, asking about her husband, wanting to know where he was, when he would be back, and ending every such outburst with despairing and incoherent self-reproaches that were absolutely incomprehensible to Almeria. On 1 or 2 occasions she had overwhelmed her host with vituperative abuse, making him responsible for her husband's absence. Those scenes, begun without any warning, ended abruptly in a sobbing flight and a bang of the door, stirred the house with a sudden, a fierce, and an evanescent disturbance, like those inexplicable whirlwinds that rise, run, and vanish without apparent cause upon the sun-scorched dead level of arid and lamentable plains. But tonight the house was quiet, deadly quiet, while Almeria stood still, watching that delicate balance where he was weighing all his chances, Joanna's intelligence, Lingard's credulity, Willem's reckless audacity, desire to escape, readiness to seize an unexpected opportunity. He weighed, anxious and attentive, his fears and his desires against the tremendous risk of a quarrel with Lingard. Yes. Lingard would be angry. Lingard might suspect him of some connivance in his prisoner's escape, but surely he would not quarrel with him, Almeida, about those people once they were gone to the devil in their own way. And then he had hold of Lingard through the little girl. Good. What an annoyance. A prisoner. As if one could keep him in there. He was bound to get away some time or other. Of course. A situation like that can't last. Anybody could see that. Lingard's eccentricity passed all bounds. You may kill a man, but you mustn't torture him. It was almost criminal. It caused worry, trouble, and unpleasantness. Almeida for a moment felt very angry with Lingard. He made him responsible for the anguish he suffered from, for the anguish of doubt and fear, for compelling him, the practical and innocent Almeida, to such painful efforts of mind in order to find out some issue for absurd situations created by the unreasonable sentimentality of Lingard's unpractical impulses. Now if the fellow were dead it would be all right, said Almeida to the veranda. He stirred a little, and scratching his nose thoughtfully, revelled in a short flight of fancy, showing him his own image crouching in a big boat, that floated arrested, say 50 yards off, abreast of Willem's landing place. In the bottom of the boat there was a gun. A loaded gun. One of the boatmen would shout, and Willems would answer, from the bushes. The rascal would be suspicious. Of course. Then the man would wave a piece of paper urging Willems to come to the landing place and receive an important message. From the Raja Lord the man would yell as the boat edged inshore, and that would fetch Willems out. Wouldn't it? Rather. And Almeida saw himself jumping up at the right moment, taking aim, pulling the trigger, and Willems tumbling over, his head in the water, the swine. He seemed to hear the report of the shot. It made him thrill from head to foot where he stood. How simple. Unfortunate. Lingard. He sighed, shook his head. Pity. Couldn't be done. And couldn't leave him there either. Suppose the Arabs were to get hold of him again, for instance to lead an expedition up the river. Goodness only knows what harm would come of it. The balance was at rest now and inclining to the side of immediate action. Almeida walked to the door, walked up very close to it, knocked loudly, and turned his head away, looking frightened for a moment at what he had done. After waiting for a while he put his ear against the panel and listened. Nothing. He composed his features into an agreeable expression while he stood listening and thinking to himself, I hear her. Crying. I believe she has lost the little wits she had and is crying night and day since I began to prepare her for the news of her husband's death, as Lingard told me. I wonder what she thinks. It's just like father to make me invent all these stories for nothing at all. Out of kindness. Kindness. Damn. She isn't deaf, surely. He knocked again, then said in a friendly tone, grinning benevolently at the closed door, "It's me, Mrs. Willems. I want to speak to you. I have important news." "What is it?" "News," repeated Almeria, distinctly. "News about your husband." "Your husband? Damn him," he added, under his breath. He heard a stumbling rush inside. Things were overturned. Joanna's agitated voice cried, "News! What? What? I am coming out." "No," shouted Almeria. "Put on some clothes, Mrs. Willems, and let me in. It's very confidential. You have a candle, haven't you?" She was knocking herself about blindly amongst the furniture in that room. The candlestick was upset. Matches were struck ineffectually. The matchbox fell. He heard her drop on her knees and grope over the floor while she kept on moaning in maddened distraction. "Oh, my God! News! Yes, yes. Ah! Where candle? Oh, my God! I can't find." "Don't go away, for the love of heaven." "I don't want to go away," said Almeria, impatiently, through the keyhole, "but look sharp. It's Connie, it's pressing." He stamped his foot lightly, waiting with his hand on the door handle. He thought anxiously, "The woman's a perfect idiot. Why should I go away? She will be off her head. She will never catch my meaning. She's too stupid." She was moving now inside the room hurriedly and in silence. He waited. There was a moment of perfect stillness in there, and then she spoke in an exhausted voice, in words that were shaped out of an expiring sigh, out of a sigh light and profound, like words breathed out by a woman before going off into a dead faint. "Come in." He pushed the door. Ali, coming through the passage with an armful of pillows and blankets pressed to his breast high up under his chin, caught sight of his master before the door closed behind him. He was so astonished that he dropped his bundle and stood staring at the door for a long time. He heard the voice of his master talking to that Sirani woman. Who was she? He had never thought about that really. He speculated for a while hazily upon things in general. She was a Sirani woman, and ugly. He made a disdainful grimace, picked up the bedding, and went about his work, slinging the hammock between two uprights of the veranda. Those things did not concern him. She was ugly, and brought here by the Raja Lord, and his master spoke to her in the night. Very well. He, Ali, had his work to do. Sling the hammock, go round and see that the watchmen were awake, take a look at the moorings of the boats, at the padlock of the big storehouse, then go to sleep. To sleep. He shivered pleasantly. He leaned with both arms over his master's hammock and fell into a light doze. A scream, unexpected, piercing, a scream beginning at once in the highest pitch of a woman's voice and then cut short, so short that it suggested the swift work of death, caused Ali to jump on one side away from the hammock, and the silence that succeeded seemed to him as startling as the awful shriek. He was thunderstruck with surprise. Almeida came out of the office, leaving the door ajar, passed close to his servant without taking any notice, and made straight for the water chatty hung on a nail in a draughty place. He took it down and came back, missing the petrified Ali by an inch. He moved with long strides, yet, notwithstanding his haste, stopped short before the door, and, throwing his head back, poured a thin stream of water down his throat. While he came and went, while he stopped to drink, while he did all this, there came steadily from the dark room the sound of feeble and persistent crying, the crying of a sleepy and frightened child. After he had drunk, Almeida went in, closing the door carefully. Ali did not budge. That Sirani woman shrieked. He felt an immense curiosity very unusual to his stolid disposition. He could not take his eyes off the door. Was she dead in there? How interesting and funny. He stood with open mouth till he heard again the rattle of the door handle. Master coming out. He pivoted on his heels with great rapidity and made believe to be absorbed in the contemplation of the night outside. He heard Almeida moving about behind his back. Chairs were displaced. His master sat down. Ali said Almeida. His face was gloomy and thoughtful. He looked at his head man, who had approached the table, then he pulled out his watch. It was going. Whenever Lingard was in Samba, Almeida's watch was going. He would set it by the cabin clock, telling himself every time that he must really keep that watch going for the future. And every time, when Lingard went away, he would let it run down and would measure his weariness by sunrises and sunsets in an apathetic indifference to mere hours, to hours only, to hours that had no importance in Samba life, in the tired stagnation of empty days, when nothing mattered to him but the quality of gutter and the size of rattans, where there were no small hopes to be watched for, where to him there was nothing interesting, nothing supportable, nothing desirable to expect, nothing bitter but the slowness of the passing days, nothing sweet but the hope, the distant and glorious hope, the hope wearying, aching and precious, of getting away. He looked at the watch. 8:30. Ali waited stolidly. Go to the settlement, said Almeida, and tell Mamat Banja to come and speak to me tonight. Ali went off muttering. He did not like his errand. Banja and his two brothers were Bajau vagabonds who had appeared lately in Samba and had been allowed to take possession of a tumble-down abandoned hut, on 3 posts, belonging to Lingard and Company, and standing just outside their fence. Ali disapproved of the favor shown to those strangers. Any kind of dwelling was valuable in Samba at that time, and if master did not want that old rotten house he might have given it to him, Ali, who was his servant, instead of bestowing it upon those bad men. Everybody knew they were bad. It was well known that they had stolen a boat from Hino Pari, who was very aged and feeble and had no sons, and that afterwards, by the truculent recklessness of their demeanor, they had frightened the poor old man into holding his tongue about it. Yet everybody knew of it. It was one of the tolerated scandals of Samba, disapproved and accepted, a manifestation of that base acquiescence in success, of that inexpressed and cowardly toleration of strength, that exists, infamous and irremediable, at the bottom of all hearts, in all societies, whenever men congregate, in bigger and more virtuous places than Samba, and in Samba also, where, as in other places, one man could steal a boat with impunity while another would have no right to look at a paddle. Almeida, leaning back in his chair, meditated. The more he thought, the more he felt convinced that Banja and his brothers were exactly the men he wanted. Those fellows were sea gypsies, and could disappear without attracting notice, and if they returned, nobody, and Lingard least of all, would dream of seeking information from them. Moreover, they had no personal interest of any kind in Samba affairs, had taken no sides, would know nothing anyway. He called in a strong voice, "Mrs. Willems." She came out quickly, almost startling him, so much did she appear as though she had surged up through the floor, on the other side of the table. The lamp was between them, and Almeida moved it aside, looking up at her from his chair. She was crying. She was crying gently, silently, in a ceaseless welling up of tears that did not fall in drops, but seemed to overflow in a clear sheet from under her eyelids, seemed to flow at once all over her face, her cheeks, and over her chin that glistened with moisture in the light. Her breast and her shoulders were shaken repeatedly by a convulsive and noiseless catching in her breath, and after every spasmodic sob her sorrowful little head, tied up in a red kerchief, trembled on her long neck, round which her bony hand gathered and clasped the disarranged dress. "Compose yourself, Mrs. Willems," said Almeida. She emitted an inarticulate sound that seemed to be a faint, a very far off, a hardly audible cry of mortal distress. Then the tears went on flowing in profound stillness. "You must understand that I have told you all this because I am your friend, real friend," said Almeida, after looking at her for some time with visible dissatisfaction. "You, his wife, ought to know the danger he is in. Captain Lingard is a terrible man, you know." She blubbered out, sniffing and sobbing together. "Do you speak the truth now?" "Upon my word of honor." "On the head of my child," protested Almeida. "I had to deceive you till now because of Captain Lingard. But I couldn't bear it. Think only what a risk I run in telling you, if ever Lingard was to know." "Why should I do it?" "Pure friendship. Dear Peter was my colleague in Makassar for years, you know." "What shall I do? What shall I do?" she exclaimed, faintly, looking around on every side as if she could not make up her mind which way to rush off. "You must help him to clear out, now Lingard is away. He offended Lingard, and that's no joke. Lingard said he would kill him." "He will do it, too," said Almeida, earnestly. She wrung her hands. "Oh, the wicked man! The wicked, wicked man," she moaned, swaying her body from side to side. "Yes. Yes. He is terrible, assented Almeria. You must not lose any time. I say. Do you understand me, Mrs. Willems? Think of your husband. Of your poor husband. How happy he will be. You will bring him his life, actually his life. Think of him. She ceased her swaying movement, and now, with her head sunk between her shoulders, she hugged herself with both her arms, and she stared at Almeria with wild eyes, while her teeth chattered, rattling violently and uninterruptedly, with a very loud sound, in the deep peace of the house. "Oh, Mother of God," she wailed. "I am a miserable woman. Will he forgive me? The poor, innocent man. Will he forgive me? Oh, Mr. Almeria, he is so severe. Oh, help me. I dare not. You don't know what I've done to him. I daren't. I can't. God help me." The last words came in a despairing cry. Had she been flayed alive, she could not have sent to heaven a more terrible, a more heart-rending and anguished plaint. "Pshaw! Pshaw!" hissed Almeria, jumping up. "You will wake up everybody with your shouting." She kept on sobbing then without any noise, and Almeria stared at her in boundless astonishment. The idea that, maybe, he had done wrong by confiding in her, upset him so much that for a moment he could not find a connected thought in his head. At last he said, "I swear to you that your husband is in such a position that he would welcome the devil. Listen well to me, the devil himself, if the devil came to him in a canoe. Unless I am much mistaken," he added, under his breath. Then again, loudly, "if you have any little difference to make up with him, I assure you, I swear to you, this is your time." The ardently persuasive tone of his words, he thought, would have carried irresistible conviction to a graven image. He noticed with satisfaction that Joanna seemed to have got some inkling of his meaning. He continued, speaking slowly, "Look here, Mrs. Willems. I can't do anything. Don't. But I will tell you what I will do. There will come here in about 10 minutes a Bugis man. You know the language, you are from Makassar. He has a large canoe, he can take you there. To the new Raja's clearing, tell him. They are 3 brothers, ready for anything. If you pay them you have some money. Haven't you?" She stood, perhaps listening, but giving no sign of intelligence, and stared at the floor in sudden immobility, as if the horror of the situation, the overwhelming sense of her own wickedness and of her husband's great danger, had stunned her brain, her heart, her will, had left her no faculty but that of breathing and of keeping on her feet. Almeria swore to himself with much mental profanity that he had never seen a more useless, a more stupid being. "Do ye hear me?" he said, raising his voice. "Do try to understand. Have you any money? Money. Dollars. Guilders. Money. What's the matter with you?" Without raising her eyes she said, in a voice that sounded weak and undecided as if she had been making a desperate effort of memory, "The house has been sold. Mr. Hudig was angry. Almayer gripped the edge of the table with all his strength. He resisted manfully an almost uncontrollable impulse to fly at her and box her ears. "It was sold for money, I suppose," he said with studied and incisive calmness. "Have you got it?" "Who has got it?" She looked up at him, raising her swollen eyelids with a great effort, in a sorrowful expression of her drooping mouth, of her whole besmudged and tear-stained face. She whispered resignedly, "Leonard had some. He wanted to get married. And Uncle Antonio, he sat at the door and would not go away. And Agostina, she is so poor and so many children, little children. And Luis the engineer. He never said a word against my husband. Also our cousin Maria. She came and shouted, and my head was so bad, and my heart was worse. Then cousin Salvatore and old Daniel the Sousa, who Almayer had listened to her speechless with rage. He thought, I must give money now to that idiot. Must get her out of the way now before Lingard is back. He made 2 attempts to speak before he managed to burst out, I don't want to know their blasted names. Tell me, did all those infernal people leave you anything? To you? That's what I want to know. I have $215, said Joanna, in a frightened tone. Almayer breathed freely. He spoke with great friendliness, that will do. It isn't much, but it will do. Now when the man comes I will be out of the way. You speak to him. Give him some money, only a little, mind. And promise more. Then when you get there you will be guided by your husband, of course. And don't forget to tell him that Captain Lingard is at the mouth of the river, the northern entrance. You will remember. Won't you? The northern branch. Lingard is death. Joanna shivered. Almayer went on rapidly, I would have given you money if you had wanted it. 'Pon my word. Tell your husband I've sent you to him. And tell him not to lose any time. And also say to him from me that we shall meet, some day. That I could not die happy unless I met him once more. Only once. I love him, you know. I prove it. Tremendous risk to me, this business is. Joanna snatched his hand and before he knew what she would be at, pressed it to her lips. Mrs. Willems. Don't. What are you? Cried the abashed Almayer, tearing his hand away. Oh, you are good, she cried, with sudden exaltation, you are noble. I shall pray every day to all the saints. I shall never mind, stammered out Almayer, confusedly, without knowing very well what he was saying. Only look out for Lingard. I am happy to be able in your sad situation, believe me. They stood with the table between them, Joanna looking down, and her face, in the half-light above the lamp, appeared like a soiled carving of old ivory, a carving, with accentuated anxious hollows, of old, very old ivory. Almayer looked at her, mistrustful, hopeful. He was saying to himself, how frail she is. I could upset her by blowing at her. She seems to have got some idea of what must be done, but will she have the strength to carry it through? I must trust to luck now." Somewhere far in the back courtyard Ali's voice rang suddenly in angry remonstrance. "Why did you shut the gate, O father of all mischief? You a watchman. You are only a wild man. Did I not tell you I was coming back?" "I am off," Mrs. Willems exclaimed Almeria. "That man is here, with my servant. Be calm." He heard the footsteps of the two men in the passage, and without finishing his sentence ran rapidly down the steps towards the riverside. Chapter 2. For the next half hour Almeria, who wanted to give Joanna plenty of time, stumbled amongst the lumber in distant parts of his enclosure, sneaked along the fences, or held his breath, flattened against grass walls behind various outhouses, all this to escape Ali's inconveniently zealous search for his master. He heard him talk with the head watchman, sometimes quite close to him in the darkness, then moving off, coming back, wondering, and, as the time passed, growing uneasy. He did not fall into the river, say, "Thou blind watcher." Ali was growling in a bullying tone, to the other man. "He told me to fetch Mamat, and when I came back swiftly I found him not in the house. There is that Sirani woman there, so that Mamat cannot steal anything, but it is in my mind, the night will be half gone before I rest." He shouted, "Master! Oh master! Oh master, what are you making that noise for?" said Almeria, with severity, stepping out close to them. The two Malays leaped away from each other in their surprise. "You may go. I don't want you any more tonight," Ali went on. "Almeria. Is Mamat there? Unless the ill-behaved savage got tired of waiting. Those men know not politeness. They should not be spoken to by white men," said Ali, resentfully. Almeria went towards the house, leaving his servants to wonder where he had sprung from so unexpectedly. The watchman hinted obscurely at powers of invisibility possessed by the master, who often at night. Ali interrupted him with great scorn. "Not every white man has the power. Now, the Raja Lord could make himself invisible. Also, he could be in two places at once, as everybody knew, except he, the useless watchman, who knew no more about white men than a wild pig. Yawa." And Ali strolled towards his hut, yawning loudly. As Almeria ascended the steps he heard the noise of a door flung to, and when he entered the veranda he saw only Mamat there, close to the doorway of the passage. Mamat seemed to be caught in the very act of slinking away, and Almeria noticed that with satisfaction. Seeing the white man, the Malay gave up his attempt and leaned against the wall. He was a short, thick, broad-shouldered man with very dark skin and a wide, stained, bright red mouth that uncovered, when he spoke, a close row of black and glistening teeth. His eyes were big, prominent, dreamy and restless. He said sulkily, looking all over the place from under his eyebrows, "White Tuan, you are great and strong, and I a poor man. Tell me what is your will, and let me go in the name of God. It is late. Almeida examined the man thoughtfully. How could he find out whether he had it? Lately he had employed that man and his two brothers as extra boatmen to carry stores, provisions, and new axes to a camp of rattan cutters some distance up the river. A 3 days expedition. He would test him now in that way. He said negligently, I want you to start at once for the camp, with surat for the cavatin. $1 a day. The man appeared plunged in dull hesitation, but Almeida, who knew his Malays, felt pretty sure from his aspect that nothing would induce the fellow to go. He urged, it is important, and if you are swift I shall give $2 for the last day. No, Tuan. We do not go, said the man, in a hoarse whisper. Why? We start on another journey. Where? To a place we know of, said Mamat, a little louder, in a stubborn manner, and looking at the floor. Almeida experienced a feeling of immense joy. He said, with affected annoyance, you men live in my house and it is as if it were your own. I may want my house soon. Mamat looked up. We are men of the sea and care not for a roof when we have a canoe that will hold 3, and a paddle apiece. The sea is our house. Peace be with you, Tuan. He turned and went away rapidly, and Almeida heard him directly afterwards in the courtyard calling to the watchman to open the gate. Mamat passed through the gate in silence, but before the bar had been put up behind him he had made up his mind that if the white man ever wanted to eject him from his hut, he would burn it and also as many of the white man's other buildings as he could safely get at. And he began to call his brothers before he was inside the dilapidated dwelling. All's well, muttered Almeida to himself, taking some loose Java tobacco from a drawer in the table. Now if anything comes out I am clear. I asked the man to go up the river. I urged him. He will say so himself. Good. He began to charge the china bowl of his pipe, a pipe with a long cherry stem and a curved mouthpiece, pressing the tobacco down with his thumb and thinking, no I shan't see her again. Don't want to. I will give her a good start, then go in chase, and send an express boat after father. Yes. That's it. He approached the door of the office and said, holding his pipe away from his lips, good luck to you, Mrs. Willems. Don't lose any time. You may get along by the bushes, the fence there is out of repair. Don't lose time. Don't forget that it is a matter of life and death. And don't forget that I know nothing. I trust you. He heard inside a noise as of a chest lid falling down. She made a few steps. Then a sigh, profound and long, and some faint words which he did not catch. He moved away from the door on tiptoe, kicked off his slippers in a corner of the veranda, then entered the passage puffing at his pipe, entered cautiously in a gentle creaking of planks and turned into a curtained entrance to the left. There was a big room. On the floor a small binnacle lamp, that had found its way to the house years ago from the lumber room of the Flash, did duty for a night light. It glimmered very small and dull in the great darkness. Almayer walked to it, and picking it up revived the flame by pulling the wick with his fingers, which he shook directly after with a grimace of pain. Sleeping shapes, covered, head and all, with white sheets, lay about on the mats on the floor. In the middle of the room a small cot, under a square white mosquito net, stood, the only piece of furniture between the four walls, looking like an altar of transparent marble in a gloomy temple. A woman, half lying on the floor with her head dropped on her arms, which were crossed on the foot of the cot, woke up as Almayer strode over her outstretched legs. She sat up without a word, leaning forward, and, clasping her knees, stared down with sad eyes, full of sleep. Almayer, the smoky light in one hand, his pipe in the other, stood before the curtained cot looking at his daughter, at his little Nina, at that part of himself, at that small and unconscious particle of humanity that seemed to him to contain all his soul. And it was as if he had been bathed in a bright and warm wave of tenderness, in a tenderness greater than the world, more precious than life, the only thing real, living, sweet, tangible, beautiful and safe amongst the elusive, the distorted and menacing shadows of existence. On his face, lit up indistinctly by the short yellow flame of the lamp, came a look of rapt attention while he looked into her future. And he could see things there. Things charming and splendid passing before him in a magic unrolling of resplendent pictures, pictures of events brilliant, happy, inexpressibly glorious, that would make up her life. He would do it. He would do it. He would. He would, for that child. And as he stood in the still night, lost in his enchanting and gorgeous dreams, while the ascending, thin thread of tobacco smoke spread into a faint bluish cloud above his head, he appeared strangely impressive and ecstatic, like a devout and mystic worshipper, adoring, transported and mute, burning incense before a shrine, a diaphanous shrine of a child idol with closed eyes, before a pure and vaporous shrine of a small god, fragile, powerless, unconscious and sleeping. When Ali, roused by loud and repeated shouting of his name, stumbled outside the door of his hut, he saw a narrow streak of trembling gold above the forests and a pale sky with faded stars overhead, signs of the coming day. His master stood before the door waving a piece of paper in his hand and shouting excitedly, "Quick, Ali! Quick!" When he saw his servant he rushed forward, and pressing the paper on him objurgated him, in tones which induced Ali to think that something awful had happened, to hurry up and get the whaleboat ready to go immediately, at once, after Captain Lingard. Ali remonstrated, agitated also, having caught the infection of distracted haste. If must go quick, better canoe. Whaleboat no can catch, same as small canoe. No, no. Whaleboat. Whaleboat. You dolt. You wretch, howled Almayer, with all the appearance of having gone mad. Call the men. Get along with it. Fly. and Ali rushed about the courtyard kicking the doors of huts open to put his head in and yell frightfully inside, and as he dashed from hovel to hovel, men shivering and sleepy were coming out, looking after him stupidly, while they scratched their ribs with bewildered apathy. It was hard work to put them in motion. They wanted time to stretch themselves and to shiver a little. Some wanted food. One said he was sick. Nobody knew where the rudder was. Ali darted here and there, ordering, abusing, pushing one, then another, and stopping in his exertions at times to wring his hands hastily and groan, because the whaleboat was much slower than the worst canoe and his master would not listen to his protestations. Almayer saw the boat go off at last, pulled anyhow by men that were cold, hungry, and sulky, and he remained on the jetty watching it down the reach. It was broad day then, and the sky was perfectly cloudless. Almayer went up to the house for a moment. His household was all astir and wondering at the strange disappearance of the Sirani woman, who had taken her child and had left her luggage. Almayer spoke to no one, got his revolver, and went down to the river again. He jumped into a small canoe and paddled himself towards the schooner. He worked very leisurely, but as soon as he was nearly alongside he began to hail the silent craft with the tone and appearance of a man in a tremendous hurry. "Schooner ahoy, schooner ahoy," he shouted. A row of blank faces popped up above the bulwark. After a while a man with a woolly head of hair said, "Sir." "The mate, the mate." "Call him, steward," said Almayer, excitedly, making a frantic grab at a rope thrown down to him by somebody. In less than a minute the mate put his head over. He asked, surprised, "What can I do for you, Mr. Almayer?" "Let me have the gig at once, Mr. Swan, at once. I ask in Captain Lingard's name. I must have it. Matter of life and death." The mate was impressed by Almayer's agitation. "You shall have it, sir. Man the gig there. Bear a hand, Srung. It's hanging astern, Mr. Almayer," he said, looking down again. "Get into it, sir. The men are coming down by the painter." By the time Almayer had clambered over into the stern sheets, 4 calashes were in the boat and the oars were being passed over the taffrail. The mate was looking on. Suddenly he said, "Is it dangerous work? Do you want any help?" "I would come." "Yes, yes," cried Almayer. "Come along. Don't lose a moment. Go and get your revolver. Hurry up. Hurry up." Yet, notwithstanding his feverish anxiety to be off, he lolled back very quiet and unconcerned till the mate got in and, passing over the thwarts, sat down by his side. Then he seemed to wake up, and called out, let go the painter. Let go the painter, yelled the bowman, jerking at it. People on board also shouted let go, to one another, till it occurred at last to somebody to cast off the rope, and the boat drifted rapidly away from the schooner in the sudden silencing of all voices. Almayer steered. The mate sat by his side, pushing the cartridges into the chambers of his revolver. When the weapon was loaded, he asked, "What is it? Are you after somebody?" "Yes," said Almeida, curtly, with his eyes fixed ahead on the river. "We must catch a dangerous man." "I like a bit of a chase myself," declared the mate, and then, discouraged by Almeida's aspect of severe thoughtfulness, said nothing more. Nearly an hour passed. The calashes stretched forward head first and lay back with their faces to the sky, alternately, in a regular swing that sent the boat flying through the water, and the two sitters, very upright in the stern sheets, swayed rhythmically a little at every stroke of the long oars plied vigorously. The mate observed, "The tide is with us." "The current always runs down in this river," said Almeida. "Yes, I know," retorted the other, "but it runs faster on the ebb. Look by the land at the way we get over the ground. A 5-knot current here, I should say." Growled Almeida. Then suddenly, "There is a passage between two islands that will save us 4 miles. But at low water the two islands, in the dry season, are like one with only a mud ditch between them. Still, it's worth trying." "Ticklish job that, on a falling tide," said the mate, coolly. "You know best whether there's time to get through." "I will try," said Almeida, watching the shore intently. "Look out now." He tugged hard at the starboard yoke line. "Lay in your oars," shouted the mate. The boat swept round and shot through the narrow opening of a creek that broadened out before the craft had time to lose its way. "Out oars." "Just room enough," muttered the mate. It was a somber creek of black water speckled with the gold of scattered sunlight falling through the boughs that met overhead in a soaring, restless arc full of gentle whispers passing, tremulous, aloft amongst the thick leaves. The creepers climbed up the trunks of serried trees that leaned over, looking insecure and undermined by floods which had eaten away the earth from under their roots. And the pungent, acrid smell of rotting leaves, of flowers, of blossoms and plants dying in that poisonous and cruel gloom, where they pined for sunshine in vain, seemed to lay heavy, to press upon the shiny and stagnant water in its tortuous windings amongst the everlasting and invincible shadows. Almeida looked anxious. He steered badly. Several times the blades of the oars got foul of the bushes on one side or the other, checking the way of the gig. During one of those occurrences, while they were getting clear, one of the calashes said something to the others in a rapid whisper. They looked down at the water. So did the mate. "Hello," he exclaimed. Mr. Almeida. Look. The water is running out. See there. We will be caught. Back, back. We must go back," cried Almeida. "Perhaps better go on." "No, back, back." He pulled at the steering line, and ran the nose of the boat into the bank. Time was lost again in getting clear. "Give way, men, give way," urged the mate, anxiously. The men pulled with set lips and dilated nostrils, breathing hard. "Too late," said the mate, suddenly. "The oars touch the bottom already." We are done. The boat stuck. The men laid in the oars, and sat, panting, with crossed arms. Yes, we are caught, said Almeria, composedly. That is unlucky. The water was falling round the boat. The mate watched the patches of mud coming to the surface. Then in a moment he laughed, and pointing his finger at the creek, "Look," he said, "the blamed river is running away from us. Here's the last drop of water clearing out round that bend." Almeria lifted his head. The water was gone, and he looked only at a curved track of mud soft and black, hiding fever, rottenness, and evil under its level and glazed surface. "We are in for it till the evening," he said, with cheerful resignation. "I did my best. Couldn't help it." "We must sleep the day away," said the mate. "There's nothing to eat," he added, gloomily. Almeria stretched himself in the stern sheets. The Malays curled down between thwarts. "Well, I'm jiggered," said the mate, starting up after a long pause. "I was in a devil of a hurry to go and pass the day stuck in the mud. Here's a holiday for you." Well. They slept or sat unmoving and patient. As the sun mounted higher, the breeze died out, and perfect stillness reigned in the empty creek. A troop of long-nosed monkeys appeared, and crowding on the outer bows, contemplated the boat and the motionless men in it with grave and sorrowful intensity, disturbed now and then by irrational outbreaks of mad gesticulation. A little bird with sapphire breast balanced a slender twig across a slanting beam of light, and flashed in it to and fro like a gem dropped from the sky. His minute round eye stared at the strange and tranquil creatures in the boat. After a while he sent out a thin twitter that sounded impertinent and funny in the solemn silence of the great wilderness, in the great silence full of struggle and death. Chapter 3 On Lingard's departure. Solitude and silence closed round Willems, the cruel solitude of one abandoned by men, the reproachful silence which surrounds an outcast ejected by his kind, the silence unbroken by the slightest whisper of hope, an immense and impenetrable silence that swallows up without echo the murmur of regret and the cry of revolt. The bitter peace of the abandoned clearings entered his heart, in which nothing could live now but the memory and hate of his past. Not remorse. In the breast of a man possessed by the masterful consciousness of his individuality with its desires and its rights, by the immovable conviction of his own importance, of an importance so indisputable and final that it clothes all his wishes, endeavors, and mistakes with the dignity of unavoidable fate, there could be no place for such a feeling as that of remorse. The days passed. They passed unnoticed, unseen, in the rapid blaze of glaring sunrises, in the short glow of tender sunsets, in the crushing oppression of high noons without a cloud. How many days? 2, 3, or more? He did not know. To him, since Lingard had gone, the time seemed to roll on in profound darkness. All was night within him. All was gone from his sight. He walked about blindly in the deserted courtyards, amongst the empty houses that, perched high on their posts, looked down inimically on him, a white stranger, a man from other lands, seemed to look hostile and mute out of all the memories of native life that lingered between their decaying walls. His wandering feet stumbled against the blackened brands of extinct fires, kicking up a light black dust of cold ashes that flew in drifting clouds and settled to leeward on the fresh grass sprouting from the hard ground, between the shade trees. He moved on, ceaseless, unresting, in widening circles, in zigzagging paths that led to no issue. He struggled on wearily with a set, distressed face behind which, in his tired brain, seethed his thoughts, restless, somber, tangled, chilling, horrible and venomous, like a nest full of snakes. From afar, the bleared eyes of the old serving woman, the somber gaze of Isa followed the gaunt and tottering figure in its unceasing prowl along the fences, between the houses, amongst the wild luxuriance of riverside thickets. Those three human beings abandoned by all were like shipwrecked people left on an insecure and slippery ledge by the retiring tide of an angry sea, listening to its distant roar, living anguished between the menace of its return and the hopeless horror of their solitude, in the midst of a tempest of passion, of regret, of disgust, of despair. The breath of the storm had cast two of them there, robbed of everything, even of resignation. The third, the decrepit witness of their struggle and their torture, accepted her own dull conception of facts, of strength and youth gone, of her useless old age, of her last servitude, of being thrown away by her chief, by her nearest, to use up the last and worthless remnant of flickering life between those two incomprehensible and somber outcasts, a shriveled, an unmoved, a passive companion of their disaster. To the river Willems turned his eyes like a captive that looks fixedly at the door of his cell. If there was any hope in the world it would come from the river, by the river. For hours together he would stand in sunlight while the sea breeze sweeping over the lonely reach fluttered his ragged garments, the keen salt breeze that made him shiver now and then under the flood of intense heat. He looked at the brown and sparkling solitude of the flowing water, of the water flowing ceaseless and free in a soft, cool murmur of ripples at his feet. The world seemed to end there. The forests of the other bank appeared unattainable, enigmatical, forever beyond reach like the stars of heaven, and as indifferent. Above and below, the forests on his side of the river came down to the water in a serried multitude of tall, immense trees towering in a great spread of twisted boughs above the thick undergrowth, great, solid trees, looking somber, severe, and malevolently stolid, like a giant crowd of pitiless enemies pressing round silently to witness his slow agony. He was alone, small, crushed. He thought of escape, of something to be done. What? A raft. He imagined himself working at it, feverishly, desperately, cutting down trees, fastening the logs together and then drifting down with the current, down to the sea into the straits. There were ships there, ships, help, white men. Men like himself. Good men who would rescue him, take him away, take him far away where there was trade, and houses, and other men that could understand him exactly, appreciate his capabilities, where there was proper food, and money, where there were beds, knives, forks, carriages, brass bands, cool drinks, churches with well-dressed people praying in them. He would pray also. The superior land of refined delights where he could sit on a chair, eat his tiffin off a white tablecloth, nod to fellows, good fellows, he would be popular, always was, where he could be virtuous, correct, do business, draw a salary, smoke cigars, buy things in shops, have boots, be happy, free, become rich. Oh God! What was wanted? Cut down a few trees. No. One would do. They used to make canoes by burning out a tree trunk, he had heard. Yes. One would do. One tree to cut down. He rushed forward, and suddenly stood still as if rooted in the ground. He had a pocket knife. And he would throw himself down on the ground by the riverside. He was tired, exhausted, as if that raft had been made, the voyage accomplished, the fortune attained. A glaze came over his staring eyes, over his eyes that gazed hopelessly at the rising river where big logs and uprooted trees drifted in the shine of midstream, a long procession of black and ragged specks. He could swim out and drift away on one of these trees. Anything to escape. Anything. Any risk. He could fasten himself up between the dead branches. He was torn by desire, by fear, his heart was wrung by the faltering of his courage. He turned over, face downwards, his head on his arms. He had a terrible vision of shadowless horizons where the blue sky and the blue sea met, or a circular and blazing emptiness where a dead tree and a dead man drifted together, endlessly, up and down, upon the brilliant undulations of the straits. No ships there. Only death. And the river led to it. He sat up with a profound groan. Yes, death. Why should he die? No. Better solitude, better hopeless waiting, alone. Alone. No. He was not alone, he saw death looking at him from everywhere, from the bushes, from the clouds. He heard her speaking to him in the murmur of the river, filling the space, touching his heart, his brain with a cold hand. He could see and think of nothing else. He saw it, the sure death, everywhere. He saw it so close that he was always on the point of throwing out his arms to keep it off. It poisoned all he saw, all he did, the miserable food he ate, the muddy water he drank. It gave a frightful aspect to sunrises and sunsets, to the brightness of hot noon, to the cooling shadows of the evenings. He saw the horrible form among the big trees, in the network of creepers, in the fantastic outlines of leaves, of the great indented leaves that seemed to be so many enormous hands with big broad palms, with stiff fingers outspread to lay hold of him, hands gently stirring, or hands arrested in a frightful immobility, with a stillness attentive and watching for the opportunity to take him, to enlace him, to strangle him, to hold him till he died, hands that would hold him dead, that would never let go, that would cling to his body forever till it perished, disappeared in their frantic and tenacious grasp. and yet the world was full of life. All the things, all the men he knew, existed, moved, breathed, and he saw them in a long perspective, far off, diminished, distinct, desirable, unattainable, precious, lost forever. Round him, ceaselessly, there went on without a sound the mad turmoil of tropical life. After he had died, all this would remain. He wanted to clasp, to embrace solid things. He had an immense craving for sensations, for touching, pressing, seeing, handling, holding on, to all these things. All this would remain for years, for ages, forever. After he had miserably died there, all this would remain, would live, would exist in joyous sunlight, would breathe in the coolness of serene nights. What for, then? He would be dead. He would be stretched upon the warm moisture of the ground, feeling nothing, seeing nothing, knowing nothing. He would lie stiff, passive, rotting slowly, while over him, under him, through him, unopposed, busy, hurried, the endless and minute throngs of insects, little shining monsters of repulsive shapes, with horns, with claws, with pincers, would swarm in streams, in rushes, in eager struggle for his body, would swarm countless, persistent, ferocious and greedy, till there would remain nothing but the white gleam of bleaching bones in the long grass, that would shoot its feathery heads between the bare and polished ribs. There would be that only left of him. Nobody would miss him, no one would remember him. Nonsense. It could not be. There were ways out of this. Somebody would turn up. Some human beings would come. He would speak, entreat, use force to extort help from them. He felt strong, he was very strong. He would. The discouragement, the conviction of the futility of his hopes would return in an acute sensation of pain in his heart. He would begin again his aimless wanderings. He tramped till he was ready to drop, without being able to calm by bodily fatigue the trouble of his soul. There was no rest, no peace within the cleared grounds of his prison. There was no relief